This is Will Stewart from OnlineChessLessons.net, and this is part 3 of the beginner opening series for the Stonewall Attack. So just opening up, I'm going to be explaining a couple of different sidelines for that you don't quite see as often played by black, and the best responses for white. So d4, d5, e3, this is the classic way to open with the Stonewall. And something black doesn't really play so much, but this is a beginner opening series, so beginners will pretty much play anything in the opening, no regard for theory, is bishop f5. And this seems like a very normal developing move for black, but it does have a drawback. The b7 pawn is going to be weakened. So trying to go into the Stonewall, trying to force it here with bishop d3, kind of justifies this bishop f5 move, and maybe just e6, and black is going to really have a fine position in the opening. So I think the best response for white is a little bit of a change of strategy here. I mean, you can't just stick with the Stonewall plan against any line, because it simply isn't going to work out best. So I think the best way to take advantage of this early bishop f5 move and weakening of the b7 pawn is simply to change your strategy and play c4. And so putting instant pressure on d5, often black will respond with either c6 or e6. The plan for white is really going to be pretty similar. So if e6, just immediately queen b3, put the pressure, and if b6 for black, white's going to get a very comfortable position. You want to take that pawn to open up this bishop to attack on this newly weakened diagonal. So pretty straightforward stuff. The plan for white, either way, if e6 or c6, immediate queen b3. If c6, it's a little bit different. I think c6 is probably a better option for black. Queen b3, again, just put the pressure on the pawn. If they play b6, you want to capture again to open up this bishop to attack. Very simple stuff. Also, you can even think here you're going to win a pawn. Check. There's no way for black to defend. You're going to pick up the d5 pawn, and that's a pawn in the bank. So, okay, b6, probably not the best move. Queen c8, the same thing. You want to open up this diagonal here. Open up the diagonal for the bishop. This will also open up the c-file later to attack the black queen. Now, you don't want to be a sucker here and grab the pawn too fast, too greedy, because black is going to pick up that bishop. So something to keep in mind. Instead, just take simply knight c3 and maybe e6, and just try to attack that queen. And white is going to have a very good position coming out of the opening. Very natural developing moves, nothing to worry about. So queen c8, I'm not so impressed. Queen c7, pretty much the same thing as queen c7, same thing as queen c8. If queen b6, this seems to be black's most active move. And I think the best way to exploit this is by straightforward natural development and attack by white. Just snatch the pawn. Just take it. If black takes, white's a pawn to the better, and I don't really see much compensation for black here at all. So most often after you take, black is going to trade queens. And in this position, I think just knight c3, with the idea of going knight to b5, threatening the a7 pawn, or knight c7 check. If knight f6, just knight b5 right away. Just take advantage of the fact that you're getting there first on the queen side. You got the open a file, and I don't really see a good way for black to defend against this. I mean, if he moves the king, okay, now black can't castle, and obviously, I think white's opening is a success. Not to mention he's going to win a pawn. So, okay, moving the king. If knight a6, just take it. And now with knight c7 check, I think white is going to just be better. Just simply better. He's going to pick up this a6 pawn. The knight is going to be kind of a pain in the neck for black to capture. I think white is just doing very good here. So, okay, so this pretty much wraps up my treatment, my recommended treatment of the bishop f5 line. Very, very simple. You got to get out of the Stonewall. It's not going to work that great anymore. Just go with c4, bring the queen out to b3, and play normal developing moves. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on. I want to also cover a sideline here. This is knight f6, bishop d3, all going well, knight c6. Okay, so knight c6, black is threatening to play e5. So that means white needs to play f4 to go ahead and stop any of that before it begins. So f4 immediately, always very important point in the Stonewall. If black is threatening to play e5, you got to play f4 and stop him. So in this sideline, black is playing a very early knight b4 and trying to pick up this bishop. And so if white retreats the bishop here, first of all, I mean, you're giving, you're negotiating with terrorists. You're giving black what he wants. And with bishop f5, black is going to be completely justified with this knight c6 to b4 maneuver. So what you want to do is white, you want to make it, black has spent a good amount of time chasing down this bishop here. So you want to make the most of that and play very quickly. So the game I'm looking at is Frank Marshall versus Richard Teichmann from Vienna, 1908. And I'm just going to go briefly through the opening just to give an idea, some more guidance for how to play the Stonewall in different circumstances. So knight f3, and the exchange, just take with the pawn. This is going to open up the c file. In this pawn on d3, these doubled pawns, doubled pawns can be weak, but in this circumstance, this d3 pawn is covering the c4 square and the very important e4 square, preventing knight e4, for example. So black is playing some normal moves, and what white wants to do is just instantly, go as fast for the attack as possible. Black expended a couple of very valuable tempi in the opening with knight c6, knight b4, and capturing the bishop on d3. So as white here, to exploit that, you need to play as quickly as possible for the attack. So first, Marshall with white completes his development. Now b6, black has got to develop this bishop to a good square, and knight e5. So right away, knight e5, I think it would have even been more accurate to play knight e5 here. Go ahead and hop that in, and now if b6, black's got to reckon with knight c6, for example. Anyway, in the game, just bishop d2, and I just want to follow this as a general recommendation of how to continue with the Stonewall in different circumstances again. So here, just rook f3. There's no need to beat around the bush. White is perfectly poised to attack on the king side with great control of the center, especially this pawn on d3, controlling the e4 and c4 squares. White doesn't need to worry. It's very difficult for black to open up the center here. So for white, this is a perfect opportunity to attack on the king side. So with c5, just rook h3. While this allows this capture, sure, the pawns don't look pretty, but they're pretty hard to attack. And look at all these squares, critical central squares, those doubled pawns are controlling. And there's really no clear way for black to attack them, so those double pawns are actually very strong in the center. So in the game, Teichmann with the black pieces, played rook c8, and now queen f3. A very good move again. Maybe better in this position is just the immediate g4. I'd usually like to recommend queen f3 immediately, but sometimes g4 right away, g5, and then you can try to bring the queen directly to h5. Just an idea. But queen f3, you can never go wrong with developing and preparing for the attack before committing with g4. So a6, kind of a slow move, and now g4. And I think in this position, white is achieving, rook h6. Nice move. Go ahead and jam that rook in there. Maybe planning to roll the h-pawn, or also transfer the queen to introduce more pressure on the h-file. So knight e2. This was kind of a slow move. I think a better move was queen h3 directly. However, knight e2, okay, it makes sense. I understand the reasoning is that after queen h3 and rook h8, now with bishop c3 first, this is a nice move as well, preparing to open the position, and that bishop's going to be pointing right at black's king. So good idea to improve the position of the pieces before committing with g5. And so now after c4, g5, I'm going to stop going through this game here because I think we've checked it out for the opening enough. If knight h5, just one more point to make though, maybe knight g3. And this was the idea to not have to sacrifice, get rid of that knight, and now we can see the open h-file. White's got a very strong attack. So after g5, we can see, just Some very general ideas in the Stonewall, just Rook F3, Rook H3, lifting the Rook, and then bringing the Queen in, Queen F3 and G4, really putting the pressure on Black before he's able to open up the center. So this is Will Stewart from onlinechesslessons.net, and thanks for tuning in.